I'd like to ask John, we've talked about the psychology of the markets and the importance of liquidity in the credit markets, and we've all, I think, been observing the developments in Dubai with a certain amount of, I think, in some cases, overreaction. In other cases, it's truly astonishing that there's a possibility that there's this default possibility and refinancing. You're in the liquidity business. You've seen the business cycle. Where are we now, and what do you? How do you think that Dubai can kind of move forward? Because it has been an experiment in openness, and I think that there's a lot of concern about throwing as they say, the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay, well, thank you. Before I get into that, or try to get into that, thank you for having me, Stuart. And I'm very grateful to be here, although when I hear the expertise and the intellect of my co-panelist here, I'm a little less grateful when I contrast it to my own. I think the situation in Dubai is, in some ways, as it relates to being on the ground in Dubai, is not that significant. Because, Dubai World is the company in question that has had the debt issues. Dubai World was effectively a global real estate company. Although it was diversified around the world, it was still concentrated in real estate. And when there's a credit crisis, which is what the world's experienced, real estate, because it's a credit-fueled business, is the most impacted. So it's not surprising that Dubai World is impacted very negatively. And it's a very big number, but in the scheme of what the world's had to deal with, or the major economies have had to deal with in terms of restructuring, it's really not that big of a number. And to put it into some context, it's probably, if all of the debt investors in Dubai lost half of their money, that's probably 6 to 9 months of earnings on the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. So that's the kind of magnitude of the Dubai crisis as it relates to kind of the global picture. Really big numbers in terms of the way we think of numbers, but actually not all that big. So to me, the real question is, and what will happen in Dubai, some form of restructuring, right, like they're talking about. Dubai in some ways was actually quite clever in that they were able to get a lot of their debt off their balance sheet, and it's really the foreign banks and the foreign investors who relied on an implicit guarantee, which the word is implicit is very different than the word explicit. So as we've learned in our own country. So I think the real question with the Dubai debt crisis is, what effect does it have in terms of how the developing world and the Middle East think about our own economy? Because that's where I think things are still very fragile. Because to some extent, as Michael indicated very well, the United States has dealt with a major financial crisis by becoming a major debtor nation. And we continue to borrow money basically for two things. We borrow money in this country to fuel our consumer spending, and we borrow money in this country for healthcare. We don't really borrow money in this country to create jobs. And we, as a country, continue to be able to access money at very low interest rates. And we access most of that money from the developing world at this point, and from wealthy Middle Eastern countries who continue to lend us this money at very low interest rates, for all the obvious reasons about the stability of the United States. But, and our own Federal Reserve has said that they will raise interest rates in this country to combat inflation. But the question is, when we have a recovery that has been so fueled by the United States borrowing, and there aren't clear signs of inflation, so the Federal Reserve won't raise rates anytime soon. But if rates go up because foreign investors decide they have less confidence in the United States because of our borrowing trends, or because if they look at California and say, well, why isn't California the United States, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious that the United States is going in the direction of California. And those interest rates go up, that takes what's a very fragile situation and potentially sets us back quite a bit. And the question is, when there's investors in our debt, in the United States debt, like the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund, and other developing countries, not that they're necessarily a developing country, but I guess they'd be put under that kind of banner. what events will precipitate them having a different view of our own creditworthiness. And it could be reallocation of resources. Like, so the fact that Abu Dhabi may have to step forward and aid Dubai, which is not clear that they do, but if they were, that may cause them to look differently at their overall investment portfolio. So I think that the real interesting thing about what's going on in the Middle East with Dubai and Abu Dhabi is not so much what's going on the ground there, because it's significant and there's a lot of headlines, but the magnitude of those dollars are not that significant, but the magnitude of reallocation of how foreign investors think about the United States currency has far-reaching consequences, not only for our own economy, but for the developing, then back to all the things Ruben was talking about, which is our ability to support growth in the Middle East in less advantaged countries. Because ultimately, the best thing for any of these economies is a free market and a lack of central planning. And we've been going down that path quite successfully across the last, probably since the Berlin Wall fell, with some speed bumps, but it's moving in the right direction. And so I think the United States is still a critical part in that continuing. And so to me, when I saw the Dubai situation, and I had the privilege of recently being to Dubai with Bridges, which was my first time to the Middle East, and it was 6 weeks ago, which is why I made the point to say that I'm really not a strong expert on the topic. But I've done my best. But it was really fascinating, because I said, this is really interesting, but it was less interesting about what was happening in Dubai, because it was pretty obvious when you were in Dubai that this was going to happen. Just like, you know, if you were in parts of Phoenix or parts of Florida or parts of Las Vegas, it wasn't so obvious. It's obvious in hindsight. Most of us didn't see it when it was happening, of course, but having seen it happening and then go to Dubai was pretty obvious. But so the magnitude of it was not that significant to Dubai. It was much more interesting to me what effect this would have on people who buy our debt, like Abu Dhabi, because we also had the privilege of having a very nice meeting with some of the people in the Abu Dhabi Investment Corporation, which is the largest sovereign wealth fund. And I posed the same question to the gentleman there, who was remarkably eloquent and linear in the way he thought about things, I thought. And I said, when will you start thinking about us differently as a borrower? And at this point, what he said then was, at this point, we think about that a lot, but at this point, we're still very confident. So the question is, what will change that confidence? And it seems to me, as a country, we have to get jobs. We have to get job growth going quickly, because we will run out of time in this game. We could get tackled at the 5-yard line, it seems to me, because at some point people are going to start wanting to get paid more for our debt, and if we don't create jobs by then. And that's where this, I think, Middle Eastern thing was interesting.